Hello, and on behalf of the Bay Area Psychological Association, I want to thank you for joining us for our annual Child Custody Evaluation and Domestic Violence Workshop update. We hold this conference every year to provide custody evaluators and members of the court with the training and resources they need to do this very important work. I'm Dr. Paul Marcille, the co-president of the Bay Area Psychological Association. I was delighted to have been asked by Dr. Jeffrey Klein to present today about the challenges faced by fathers when they are in a family that has experienced a divorce. In my private practice, I specialize working with adolescents and adults, almost all males, and at least half of the adolescents and the men I work with are from divorced families and experience the consequences of those divorces. I believe that the impact of divorce on men and fathers and the subsequent impact upon their children has been poorly understood and grossly underestimated as a public health problem. As I will share with you today, the role of fathers in the lives of their children is essential. Engaging in loving and involved relationships with one's children leads to better physical health, better mental health, better professional and financial success, and a superior quality of life for men. And having a loving and engaged father, whether in an intact marriage or in a successful divorce, will lead children, both girls and boys, to be physically healthier, emotionally healthier. It leads them to perform better academically and later professionally in their professional lives, and to engage in healthier relationships and to be more productive members of our communities. The role of fathers, even in divorce, should not be underestimated, either by fathers, by mothers, by the court system, custody evaluators, mental health professionals, and society at large. So I'm going to share my screen now. If you'll be patient with me for a moment. One more second. There we go. So today I'm going to be talking about divorced dads. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Paul Marcille. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice down in Saratoga in the South Bay. I'm the current co-president of the Bay Area Psych Association, past president of the California Psychological Association. I'm the Northern California Federal Advocacy Coordinator for the American Psychological Association. And I've had a 30-plus year career as a professor and a dean in academic settings. However, my full-time work now is in my private practice, where, as I said, I specialize in working with adolescents and adults, and primarily men, and many of whom have been affected by divorces. So the learning objectives of today's talk is to help you better understand the mental health challenges faced by divorced fathers, to help you better understand the potential negative consequences on both dads and their children from divorce, to help you develop strategies for divorced dads to improve their mental health following divorce, and to help you develop strategies to assist divorced fathers to be engaged and loving fathers and benefiting their children. What we'll basically be doing in the next 45, 50 minutes, we'll be reviewing some statistics about divorce, which you're probably more familiar with than I am because of the work that you all do. We'll review the challenges faced by divorced fathers trying to maintain good relationships with their kids. We'll review the consequences of deficient fatherhood for the children of divorced parents. And I'll be providing some recommendations that you can share with divorced fathers in order to be healthier and more engaged with their children. So I'm sure none of these statistics will be a surprise to anyone in this group. The United States has the third highest divorce rate in the world. Approximately 40 to 50% of first marriages in the US end in divorce. And as you're aware, the divorce rate for second marriages is even higher. In 2021, the Center for Disease Control reported that there were some 1,985,000 marriages in the United States. And at that same time, there were almost 690,000 divorces. And these are from 45 states who are reporting, which excluded California. In California, in 2020, there were about 128,000 total divorce filings, which ranked California as one of the top 10 divorce states in the United States, with about a 60% divorce rate. The divorce rate in the U.S. is highest among adults aged 25 to 39, and with the majority of those occurring in the first 5 years of marriage. The most common reasons for divorce, as you're all aware, are inability to communicate effectively, incidences of infidelity on either partner's part, and financial difficulties. And the median duration of first marriages is typically 8 years when they do end in divorce. Today, approximately 50% of all American children will witness the end of their parents' marriage. And as we're aware, the impact of those can be, life-changing and traumatic. Now, most children whose parents divorce are resilient and exhibit no obvious psychopathology and psychological problems following a divorce. However, even among those kids who seem to adapt well, there continues to be painful feelings, disappointments, frustrations, particularly when there are encounters where both families come together, both parents come together, things like school events, sports events, family gatherings, weddings, graduations, things like that. So no one is left unaffected, by divorces. A recent survey of some 1 million children showed that kids growing up in single-parent homes were more than twice as likely to experience a serious psychological condition or disorder, more likely to have suicidal ideations or suicidal attempts, or to develop addiction problems, whether it's alcohol and substances or other maladaptive types of habits. This information came from an article by Jane Anderson entitled "The Impact of Family Structures on the Health of Children and the Effects of Divorce." The potential emotional trauma of divorce affects kids of every age. However, we're aware that the largest impact comes in children, between the ages of 2 and 3 up to 15 or middle adolescence. These years are critical stages of development, of intellectual development, social and emotional development, and it's when children are forming their concepts of themselves and relationships and parental relationships. We do know that once children go through puberty and move into later adolescence and develop more sophisticated executive functioning skills, there's a greater likelihood that they'll be able to understand and accept their parents' divorce, and that the negative impacts of parents separating may be minimized. That's not always the case, but as children develop more sophisticated ways of thinking about and processing emotions and processing relationships, they become more adept at adjusting to changing family situations. Some of the more common effects that divorce have on kids, and again, those of you who evaluate children are aware of this. First is poor academic performance, the disruption, living situations, the emotional challenges, insecurities, about where I'm gonna sleep, who I'm going to be with, tensions between the parents can oftentimes lead to difficulty in focusing on school and academic work. And we see in kids whose parents are divorced additional academic challenges. There's a loss of interest in social activities. Kids may be embarrassed or ashamed or frightened to share what's happening in their family with their friends and their schoolmates. And it may lead to them possibly questioning the safety and viability of friendships. if parental relationships can dissolve, what are friendships? What can happen with friendships? Now, we're also aware that the divorce can also, cause children to become even more reliant and dependent on friends and other families as they look for a sense of security and consistency in their life. Divorce involves change, okay? Adapting to new family dynamics, new houses, new living situations. Sometimes having to change school systems, change neighborhoods, and learning to adapt to those things can be extremely difficult and may leave kids feeling overwhelmed and disengaged. Emotional sensitivity. I mean, the sense of loss, the anger, frustration, confusion, guilt, and anxiety that come from that potentially come from such a transition can leave kids feeling angry, overwhelmed, traumatized, and perhaps overly emotional and sensitive and fragile, and overly sensitive to slights, to errors, to things that either parent does or doesn't do. As I indicated in my practice, I work mostly with fathers and sons, and the increased sensitivity to even the slightest transgression by fathers and stuff can lead to real strong overreactions. I mean, I recently met with the son of a divorced father. As they were coming into my office, the father attempted to brush some leaves off of his son's shoulders, and his son reacted violently. Pushed his father away, said, "Don't touch me." And this was just an innocent interaction, but because of the situation, the child overreacted. Just a perfect example. Children of divorce are often angry at their parents. They're angry at themselves, the world. How could this be happening? And did I possibly contribute something? Did I do something wrong? And oftentimes kids in a divorced family or going through a divorce will look for reasons. Why is this happening? Is it just my parents that don't love each other, or did I do something wrong? Did I possibly contribute to this in some way? And that can lead to feelings of depression, stress, and physical health problems. Research by the National Institute of Health has shown that the absence of father oftentimes causes children to act out in self-destructive ways. The lack of two parents in the house to help with disciplinary issues, to set rules, to monitor things and stuff, that oftentimes disappears when kids are living in a single-parent household. And children who've experienced divorce in the last 20 years are much more likely to be engaged in antisocial activities, rebel through self-destructive behaviors, tend to smoke, use drugs, and act out in other ways. Rates of teen pregnancy, we'll talk about this among daughters and stuff, but daughters of in divorced families, oftentimes there's some research that indicates that they're more sexually active in an earlier age. Rates of teen pregnancy among girls whose fathers were absent are 3 to 8 times higher, depending on when in the girl's life the divorce occurred. And we oftentimes see health problems in children whose parents have divorced. The younger they are, the more likely their sleep is to have been disturbed. We see increased levels of eating disorders, increased visits to primary care doctors for a variety of health issues, oftentimes stress-related. Another consequence of divorce among children is a loss of sense of security about I don't want to call it the sanctity, but the security that a family brings to a child, a sense of security, well-being, belief in the future that I'll be taken care of, and that sense of security disappears. And we do know, research indicates that children who've experienced divorce are more likely to divorce themselves in their own future relationships. In fact, the research indicates the propensity to divorce may be 2 to 3 times as high in children who come from divorced families. The Ann Casey Foundation Kids Counts report from 2021 reported that some 34% of children under the age of 18 in the United States are now living in single-parent families. And most of these 23 million children, live with their mothers, and all too often have limited access to their father, to paternal grandparents, and to the father's extended family. So again, 34% of children under the age of 18, which equates to some 23 million children, across the United States. And most divorcing fathers assume that custody of children prior to divorce will work out in a reasonable manner for them, which is unfortunately rarely the case because of the way that the courts function, human services function, and because of litigious nature of the frequently litigious nature of divorces. In a 2019 study of some 700 contested divorce custody cases, judges awarded fuller primary custody to mothers in 496 cases, to fathers in only 100 cases, and joint custody in only 104 cases. And we know that in over 80% of US divorces, it's the father who moves out of the family home and sets up a new residency. Now, today, more and more fathers are actively seeking joint custody of their children, but approximately only 10% of them actually have residential custody. As you're all aware, most fathers in a divorce usually get custody every other weekend, and some of the time with them during the summer or holidays. And this arrangement is rarely at the request or desire of fathers. In fact, I know of no fathers that I work with who find this a satisfactory arrangement and who are constantly, requesting and battling for more time with their children. So I would just like to highlight that some of us believe that a father's absence in the life of their children is actually a public health crisis in the United States and elsewhere. I mean, research has demonstrated that when able and willing fathers are active in the lives of their children, those children are happier and healthier. Research has demonstrated that the absence of a father in the life of a child can lead to increased infant mortality. And that's not necessarily because mothers are abusive, but two hands make for more diligence, more awareness, more interventions when there are difficulties. There is increased child neglect and abuse that occurs when fathers are not present in the home. And I'd like to say I'm only talking about fathers here because that's what I was asked to address. I mean, mothers undoubtedly play an essential role in the life of their children. No mothers aren't all saints. They contribute to some of these issues as well, and their absence is equally important. But I'm talking about fathers today because that's what I was asked to address. There's poor eating habits, and obesity and eating disorders. We see more sexual activity by minors when fathers are not present in the home. Poor social adjustment with friends and also with adults. There's incidents of more promiscuity and teen pregnancy among daughters when fathers are not present in the home. In fact, there's some interesting research which seems to indicate that the lack of a presence of a male figure, of a father figure in a home, actually causes girls to hit puberty earlier and to become more sexually active in an earlier age. Incidents of smoking, alcohol, substance abuse are higher in kids whose fathers are not present in the home. There are more incidents of kids running away, crime, delinquency. As I mentioned earlier, there are 2 to 3 times the rates of mental health issues and suicidal ideation and attempts, decreased academic performance, and high school dropouts, increased likelihood of children both living in poverty while they're kids and moving into poverty afterwards, and not going to college, and increased use of welfare and other social support systems. A study entitled Leading Women for Shared Parenting in North Dakota found that from 2011 to 2017, and this was a study that looked at custody awards in divorces. They found a very, very unbalanced system of shared custody. They discovered that a child's opportunity to have a meaningful relationship with both parents is mostly determined by, one, if the mother wants the father involved in the child's life or not, and the particular county and judge in which the divorce case was filed. And you all would be more aware of whether these statistics are synonymous or equivalent to the current situation in California or not. Despite the fact that shared custody rarely occurs, there's a tremendous amount of evidence that indicates that the best post-divorce arrangement for children, and the one that's not regularly utilized by courts from custody arrangements, is having shared custody. Having a father only able to see, his children every other weekend and some days or holidays over the summer is not adequate. It removes fathers from the essential role that they play in raising their children and helping their children to develop normally. The National Parents Organization has conducted a state-by-state analysis of shared parenting laws and found that a majority of state statutes are similarly behind the times in arranging for joint custody of children in divorces. The research has demonstrated that the areas where fatherly involvement is being minimized by court systems and by our society is in primary education. Fathers often find themselves excluded in educational planning, corrective actions when their children are struggling, and involvement in anything that leads to a child reaching their academic potential. Oftentimes, it's the mothers who are the primary caregivers and the primary contact and primary person involved in academics. Divorced fathers rarely have access to support classes or systems to support them in becoming better parents. We believe that fathers are not directly. We tend to believe that fathers are not directly affected by divorce as much as mothers, and are far less likely to be given custody of their children and have less time, to devote to parenting. And fathers typically don't seek out professional help with the fallout for their own personal issues to divorce and their frustrations, about their involvement or lack of involvement with their children. In terms of medical issues in healthcare, priority and focus is almost always placed on maternal involvement and exclusion of fathers, even though fathers can and should play an active role. Most Americans believe that physical custody of children should be equally split between parents. However, this only appears to be the case in 1 out of 5 divorce situations. And we, mental health workers and professionals, often underestimate the impact that the lack of presence of fathers plays in their children's lives. People who are involved in custody evaluations, people involved in sorry, I'm blanking on it, but those of us who work with divorced families oftentimes underestimate the horrible impact of lack of contact with children can have on a father's mental health and physical health and professional well-being. And we oftentimes minimize the role that fathers play, in the lives of their kids. The United Nations has regularly been putting out a report about the state of the world's fathers. And in the latest one, issued in 2021, found that playful and affectionate interactions with fathers is shown to predict a child's positive social and emotional involvement with others. So the role of fathers is just as important as the role of mothers in creating healthy emotional and social balance in children. The report found that the involvement of fathers before, during, and after the birth of a child, has lasting benefits, including positive effects on maternal and newborn health, from increased prenatal and postnatal health care visits, more successful breastfeeding, a greater likelihood of parents seeking out immunizations and care for childhood illnesses. The report found that toddlers with involved fathers begin school with higher levels of language skills and cognitive preparation. And I find this regularly, that there's a growing body of research that documents the importance of parental involvement in reading and engaging with media and with children. Children whose parents spend time reading with them, playing with them, watching videos with them, and discussing these with them have more advanced vocabularies and language skills and are an advantage academically when they begin school. And you can imagine that a single parent does not have the wavelength, the energy, and the time to spend doing these things when they don't have a partner to share housework with and other responsibilities. And this is a whole other topic, but the insidious and invasive nature of technology in our lives and the lives of our families and children and stuff contributes to this problem as well. I mean, any of you all who are parents and have had young children in the last 10 to 15 years, and I was, you're tempted to, give their children an iPad, a phone to watch a video on, sit them down in front of the TV while you're busy doing other things. And in divorced families, this is exaggerated, just because of the increased responsibility and work involved in being a single parent. The United Nations report found that when fathers are involved in their children's education, children not only do better at school, but they're also more likely to graduate and achieve higher levels of career and economic success. And there's much greater involvement in higher education in children who come from intact families. And that's not just because of finances, it's simply because of additional motivation for professional success. A father's linguistic interactions with a child at an early age is strongly related to the development of his or her language skills, as I mentioned before. So having both parents in the home, both parents engaged in problem solving, thinking through things, asking questions, modeling appropriate verbal interactions and discussions are critical to children developing advanced language and problem solving skills. That paternal involvement from both fathers and mothers has been linked to lower rates of depression, fear and self-doubt in children, and other psychological problems. The rate of delinquency from school is lower among boys whose fathers actively participate in their care. Another finding was that a father's approach to household chores and involvement in household chores was a strong predictor of professional ambitions in their daughters when they grew older. A University of British Columbia study found last year. And young women with engaged fathers also had higher overall opinions of themselves. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families also reported that along with higher reported levels of self-esteem, girls had higher expectations for the quality of their future relationships, were less likely to be in abusive relationships or become victims of relational abuse. And as I mentioned earlier, there's even some evidence that the presence and active involvement of fathers in their daughters' lives leads to delays in puberty, reduced early sexual activity, reduced teen pregnancy, and higher levels of self-confidence and lower levels of being in abusive relationships in the future. So it's difficult it's difficult. It's important. I don't think we can overemphasize, that each parent brings different skills, different values, different ideas to their children's lives, and the lack of those, and in particular, the lack of fathers' active involvement in their children's lives when a custody situation has led them to have, reduced contact with their kids, is tremendously problematic. So marriages may end, but when children are involved, that doesn't mean that the relationship between the exes is over. Right? So we know that for the sake of children, and this is the point of my conversation today, marital relationships have to change and develop into parenting relationships. And as we're aware, this change is difficult because of the highly charged emotional situation around divorce. When there's been infidelity, communication problems, financial problems, there often is a tremendous amount of anger, distrust, suspicion, jealousy, you name it. And these all potentially interfere with the ability to co-parent, and to do what's best for children in a divorce situation. We know that fathers in divorces experience a huge range of emotions, guilt that they haven't held up their end of the marriage, frustration about being excluded, from having physical custody of their children or not being able to be more involved in day-to-day decision making, anger that may be mixed with a sense of relief about getting out of a marriage, but along with a sense of loss, of being with their children, embarrassment and shame, pain, a sense of failure, failure being a husband, failure being a father, a mixture of pride and honor, but disbelief that this is happening. Feelings of love and regret and longing for the things that they've lost, concerns about their financial stability. Particularly in the area where we live, the cost of living is enormous, and the likelihood that any divorced couple can continue to maintain two households, the same level of standard of living is unusual and not likely. There's loneliness. It's typically the father who leaves the home, who's living on his own, doesn't see his children very much, and so the sense of loneliness and isolation and depression can often be overwhelming. And the fatigue involved in co-parenting when you're not living in the same household, while maintaining professional life and maintaining, or perhaps making a significant financial contribution to one's family, even though you're not living in the same home. So let's now talk a little bit about how divorce creates problems or challenges between fathers and their children. So severing of relationships and the disillusionment of families, it's the consequence of a divorce. And as couples who have been in bitter divorces have a much harder time rebuilding their lives than those who have peaceful divorces. They also have more difficulty becoming co-parents and putting their feelings about each other aside in order to do what's best for the kids. And the adversarial nature, of our legal system in regards to divorce also contributes to and exacerbates the ill will and the bad feelings that often comes out of a divorce. We know that high levels of parental conflict, whether during a marriage or in a high conflict divorce, have an especially negative influence on the psychological adjustment of children. And the degree of conflict and the impact and the psychological health of the parents and the quality of the parent-child relationship following divorce. These are the most important predictors of a child's adjustment, whether it's good or bad, to the divorce. So the conflict, the psychological state of the parents, either before or following the divorce, and the quality of the relationships that each parent has with their children following divorce. This is what determines whether children adapt, well or not to a divorce. Divorce is ultimately about change, changes in parenting patterns, changes in housing arrangements, changes in economic security and emotional security. And more often it's the father upon whom most of the change, particularly in the early stages of the divorce, falls. When all this change is combined with along with a deep sense of rejection, the total experience can be quite traumatic to men. Okay? And again, this is not to ignore the impact of divorce on women and mothers, but this talk is focused more on fathers. So these are some comments that clients of mine have made, clients who have been going through a divorce or who have been divorced for a while. I not only lost my home, my wife and partner, but I also lost my children, my dog, everything. Another stated that I never realized how much getting out of a bad marriage would harm my relationship with my son. So any sense of relief, getting out of a problematic relationship also has a consequence on the relationship with children. Another comment was I lost 10 years of my relationship with my daughter that I will never get back. And this from a former client of mine who was alienated from his daughter. She refused to see him for a 10-year period during her adolescence from the age of 9 to 19. And they have since reconciled. She now recognizes that her father is not a horrible person. And they see each other now on a regular basis. However, neither one of them will ever recapture those years that were probably crucial for the daughter's development. How do you value something like that? And this from one other client of mine. I found myself forced out of the house that had been my home for 15 years. I was excluded from the lives of my children and separated from my familiar surroundings and the things I held dear and cared about. I had nowhere to turn. I was discounted. No one was aware of my pain. And I became involved in a vicious, uncaring, unfair adversary system that I'm still fighting today. And so this is from my father who divorced several years ago and is still battling to try and spend time with his children. So we know that children's relationships with their fathers are more likely to undergo dramatic change from divorce than are their relationships with their mothers. Fathers only have sole custody of children about 10% of the time. Most men following divorce, there's a dramatic reduction in the amount of time, as I mentioned, that they're allowed to see their children. Their parental rights typically are terminated, and frequently they're reduced to a visitor role, visiting with their children, periodically. And most children from divorced families probably have more access and spend more time with their neighbors than with their fathers. And frequently, unfortunately, the courts, because of this bias towards mothers having primary custody or sole custody, the courts oftentimes have created this situation. So it's difficult for fathers to participate in the everyday lives of their children when they're only with them a few days a month. And most fathers are deeply frustrated and grieving about their diminished contact with their children. They miss out on daily activities, the contact that they had, the daily, hourly contact they had when they were living with their children. They took for granted until they don't have that anymore. And they're frequently frustrated about finding ways to compensate for that loss, which sometimes isn't even possible. So what children of divorced parents need most of all is for the two parents to cooperate around issues affecting them. And that cooperation has to do with issues around money, around visitations, around academics and school, sports and extracurricular activities, vacations, healthcare, and etc. So that the children don't end up in the middle when there are disagreements and don't end up suffering, as a result of that. Children need parents to be pleasant with each other when they move between households, and they need reasonableness in accommodating to changing schedules. And again, you all know this. I mean, I don't need to explain this. And when I'm working with fathers who have been divorced, who don't have much custody with their children, and who are angry and frustrated, a big part of the work is involved helping them to process those feelings, and to not allow their frustration, their anger, their disappointment, their disgust towards their ex-wife to interfere with establishing a healthy and effective co-parenting relationship. Because if they don't, it's the children who suffer as a result of these things. And I think this is probably the biggest point of my talk, is to try to help fathers understand the importance of processing their feelings and their emotions about the divorce and about their ex-partner, so that it has no impact or a minimal impact on the relationship that they have with their children and doesn't interfere with those relationships. When parents share custody and the children are living in both households, it's important that fathers understand that kids need to have their own rooms, their beds, their own desks, their clothes and toys to be made to feel at home in both of their homes, and that they don't just sleep on the couch, when they go to their fathers. This is often a challenge because fathers oftentimes have economic consequences of being divorced, and if the mother and children stay in the home, the house, the primary residence, fathers oftentimes are living in greatly reduced size places, apartments, studios, one bedroom. I have one boy who visits his father in a one bedroom apartment every other weekend, and his father has him, the boy, sleep in his the boy's 14 years old, has him sleep in his bedroom, and the father sleeps out on the couch in the living room, which is unacceptable to both of them and uncomfortable. So here are some recommendations that I try to give to divorced fathers. My number one is to continue to love your children, as much as possible, and repeat this to them over and over again, that you may not be with them, but you love them. And you're loving them not just through words, but actions, with physical contact, with hugs and kisses, sitting close to them, cherishing the time that they get to spend together. Fathers need to assure their kids that they'll be safe, let them know that both parents are going to continue to provide for them to the best of their ability, and that the divorce is not their fault. And particularly with younger children, it's important that fathers let the children know that number one, it's not the fault of them, and to not have negative or hostile things to say about their mother. Because that can conflict and create a rift in the relationship as well. Let children know it's okay to love both their mother and their father as they did before the divorce, and that the love they have for both parents doesn't have to change, even if the parents, the father and the mother, are no longer in love, together. And loving and liking are two different things. Divorced parents need to support their children's relationship with the other parent. And there shouldn't be any games played. Both parents should inform the other of special events, functions, extracurricular activities whenever possible, so both parents can participate and one parent's not missing out on things. perhaps giving a child an impression that that parent doesn't care. In situations when there is some tension or some alienation, which I'll talk about shortly, I recommend that fathers keep a journal of their experiences following a divorce. That they write down their thoughts, their emotions, their regrets, the feelings they have about their children, how much they love them, think of them, miss them, and keep a record of visits and efforts that the father has made to be with them, and their perspective about court hearings. And this isn't to be shared with children until later in life. But it's important, I think, that there's a record of all the things a father has done or has tried to do to be with their children. And it may only be that when the kids are older that they'll understand these things. But keeping a record that you can then share, that a father can share with his children later on, I think is an important strategy. And it can open children's eyes if they've been told or have had misperceptions about, who their fathers were or what they were doing during this difficult time. Some more do's and don'ts for dads is to listen to children and honor their feelings without judging. Don't try to fix or try to change how they feel. Simply listen and be there for them, and acknowledge, the pain, the disappointment, the frustration, the anger. And remember that children's feelings don't have to reflect your own. Fathers want to create a safe space for the children to express themselves. And the fathers also want to model appropriate ways to deal with feelings. To find healthy ways to express feelings, to develop a vocabulary, to express feelings. And this is a good reason for fathers to be in therapy, to learn about emotions and to develop a richer vocabulary around them and ways of sharing them with their children. If I do one consistent thing with my male clients, it's to help them to both feel their feelings, not repress things, not cover things up, not tough things out, but also to develop a richer vocabulary about what they're feeling. And I often find that men, because of the way that boys and men are enculturated in our country, tend to have a limited vocabulary and don't understand some of the nuances of things that they may be feeling. And if you can't articulate it, I guess there's some questions about whether you're actually feeling them or not, or those feelings get expressed in more primary emotions such as anger and frustration or rage, which is rarely productive. Fathers need to reinforce the idea that their children are members of two homes, and they shouldn't feel guilty or if they have to choose which is the real or their better home, regardless of the amount of time spent with each parent. And as I mentioned before, ideally, each parent is able to ensure that a child has a place in each home that belongs to them, even if it's only a section of a room. One other point, and again, I'm speaking from a father's perspective, but if the ex-wife finds a new partner or remarries, as hard as it may be to develop communication and a relationship with that new person, it's important that they will play a role in the life of children, and it's better and ideal to not be angry, not to be jealous, to not be spiteful towards this new individual, and to work to form a new blended family. Particularly if both of the ex-spouses remarry. Fathers should provide children with discipline as well as love, and that means that the dads shouldn't be Disney dads. They shouldn't just be there for the fun moments, for the vacation moments, for the to provide gifts for birthdays and Christmas, but they should be involved when children need to be disciplined and boundaries need to be set. And effective co-parenting involves doing the fun things, but also dealing with the difficult things. So do the hard as well as the fun things. Never badmouth, judge, or criticize the other parent. Children literally view themselves as half their mothers and half their fathers, And when one parent attacks the other, they're also attacking the children. And this applies to step parents and other significant adults in the children's life as well. Children shouldn't be exposed to divorce details. It's never in their interest to understand to know what's going on in the court and be dragged into that, or the financial details or intimate details of what's going on. This can lead to confusion, depression, and anger in children. Never use the children as a messenger or a spy, and always communicate directly with the ex-partner. And don't retaliate when the other parent says or does something damaging. Retaliation or giving children the other side of the story continues a cycle of dragging children into the middle of the divorce. And if one parent is being critical of the other, then the parent who hasn't done that should simply apologize and said, "I'm sorry you had to hear that," but not get into it. Fathers need to not allow their children to become best friends or confidants. They're children, and so they're not to be shared all your frustrations, anger about the divorce, or to become some kind of adult-like confidant. This is a reason that fathers should be in therapy or joining a supportive network. And don't place blame. If children ask why the divorce happened, tell them that this is between the mother and the father. It has nothing to do with them, and that someday they'll understand. As I mentioned, don't try to buy children's love or outbuy the other parent. Kids all like gifts, but what's most important is spending time with them. It's all about what you do together and not what you buy. When discussing difficult things or important decisions in life, the ideal is that both parents get together and explain these things to the children together. And the method for doing so should be worked out beforehand, not just spontaneously when doing a handover for visitations. And fathers should reassure kids that divorce isn't their fault. It had nothing to do with them. This is something having to do with a problem between adults. And children need to be told that there's nothing they can do to change what's happening. It's not their responsibility. They didn't contribute to the problem, but it's not their job to fix it. And tell them again that kids need to be told that they're loved, on a regular basis. So let me just skip ahead. I'm going to provide my PowerPoint presentation to everyone at the end of this presentation. So you'll be able to look at these, and I'm cognizant of the fact I'm running out of time here. Date thoughtfully. Dating can be unsettling for kids, particularly for fathers who bring a new person into their life. And it's a good idea to wait until you're in a more committed, secure relationship before introducing someone new into your children's life, because it can be painful if children become attached to a dating partner and then that person leaves because the relationship is broken up. A little bit of information about parental alienation. You all know what occurs when one or both parents intentionally or unintentionally displays to the child negativity aimed at the other parent. It damages the child's relationship with that parent and turns the child's emotions against the other parent. And most of us who work with kids would agree that parental alienation is a form of child abuse. In my experience, working with kids as parents of divorce, parental alienation is more common than not, and that healthy and constructive blended families are the exception rather than the rule. And as we're aware, alienation can include not just derogatory or denigrating comments about the former spouse, but it can include all types of subtle remarks, looks, gestures, disagreements, disrespect. And I frequently have to point out to divorced parents that even small negative comments about the other parent, being late, forgetting things, not attending an event, dating someone not attractive, those are all subtle forms of alienation. Fathers need to be taught what parental alienation is, and with the divorced fathers that I work with, I always spend several therapy sessions explaining this to them and making them more cognizant of what it is, about what not to do, and the damage that it can cause. It's parental alienation for dads is painful and not uncommon. And it can be depressing, frustrating, enrage, fathers. And it's important when fathers believe it's occurring, to be calm, to be patient, and not allow the anger and stuff to interfere with the relationship with their kids. When it occurs and a child objects to or refuses to see their father, individual therapy for both the child and the father, along with family therapy or reconnection therapy, can be effective. And what's most important, I said, is patience on the part of fathers, because this kind of situation can go on for years. Impatience, frustration, acting out with anger on the part of the father may only exacerbate parental alienation. So to repair the damage, the best course is to educate the alienating parent, the person who's doing this, about the dangers of their behaviors, and to increase the time that kids get to spend with the targeted parent. And with that additional time, oftentimes the alienation will clear up. And with age, many children, when they become adolescents, can gain a perspective about their parents' relationship, and they'll develop new and realistic understanding of the alienated, parent. So, just a few things that I need to hurry up and finish here. Some things that divorced dads often wish their ex-partners would know about them. One is that I bring something to our children's lives that only a father can bring. When I'm not with our children, I feel pain, even if it doesn't look like I do. I don't wish to be a Disney dad, but I only have our child for 4 days a month, and discipline's not on the top of my list of things to do because of that lack of time. So involve me more. We're still a team. I'm not the enemy, and I'd like us to cooperate as co-parents in a civil way. I want to be included in important events in my children's life, because the less time I spend with them hurts our relationship and hurts them. So please include me. I know your intentions are good to provide for our children, and I hope you appreciate that that's how I feel as well. I'm grateful for the work that you do with kids and the work you do with me to co-parent. I still care about our family, but families change, and I still love my children. I'm trying to be less controlling of what goes on when I'm not with my children, and have confidence in your parenting. And I'm trying my best to move on from the pain of our separation in a healthy way. And real pain occurs when relationships end. Such pain needs to be acknowledged and processed to get to a healthier communication pattern that helps the children instead of hurts them. And it's up to parents to be adults. Seek out other adults and professionals to help them with their own frustrations. Seek professional assistance and help. I think it's a good idea for parents to each be in therapy to process their own feelings and be aware of how those negative feelings following a divorce may negatively impact their children. So I've included some resources at the end of my presentation. And these are just some websites with advice and suggestions for fathers and the impact that divorce can have on children. The California government, Department of Health, produces a very, very useful guide that many of you may be familiar with, called Families Change Guide to Separation and Divorce, that includes information about for fathers as well as mothers. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up. I'm unable to be with you today. I'd hope to be able to participate at the end and answer questions that any of you have, but I am actually in France at the moment, as my wife's father is not doing well, and maybe at the end of his life. My contact information is here, my telephone number, my email address, and I would invite any of you who have questions about anything I've talked about today, who would like to discuss any of these things, advice, get possible referrals for fathers you may be working with who are struggling with a divorce. Please don't hesitate to contact me. I'd be happy to speak with you and offer any advice or guidance. So thank you again for being here today. Thank you again for the work that you all do with this very important topic. And I wish you all well for the rest of the day.